Guys, it's Michelle and I'm here with my October 2015 reading wrap-up. I read 6 books this month and it was a phenomenal reading month for me. Best month I've had in a long time. I sadly kind of attribute that to being mostly done with the Read Harder challenge and just being able to just pick up whatever I felt like picking up. So like I said, it was a great month, and some of these books were whoppers, so I got a lot of reading done. First up, I finished The Novice by Taran Matharu. This is a debut novel. It's YA fantasy, and I fell in love with the cover when I saw it, and when I read the premise, it intrigued me because it is fantasy, and I've read a ton of fantasy, but this involves someone with the ability to use magic to summon a demon protector. So hadn't seen that done in books, had seen that done a lot in video games, so I was interested to see how it would play out. It was fast-paced. I loved the characters. I wanted to know what was happening next. There were a million different fantastical ideas pulled in from just various fantasy influences, so that was neat to read about. It's basically a boy with a destiny story. You have an orphan who was abandoned at the gates of a city. That city was kind of in dire straits, and so really only the blacksmith could afford to take in the orphan. He's now about 15 and by accident discovers he can summon demons but has no idea what he's doing with it, gets in trouble, and has to flee. He ends up at a magic school, and then the story carries on from there. Like I said, it was a lot of fun to read. There were a million characters. There were a lot of politics involved in the story. There were politics in the first town where he grew up. There were politics at the magic school between the students themselves. There were politics going on with the different masters. And then the country this is all taking place in is at war towards the north with the elves and towards the south with the orcs. Plus there are dwarves that live there, and there's political tension there as well. So no shortage of political tension in this book whatsoever. It is a debut novel, and so it did have a little trouble with pacing and a little trouble with wrapping things up. Some things were kind of left, as loose ends. Other things were wrapped up a little too neatly, but I think this author shows a lot of promise, and like I said, it was fun to read, and I was compelled to read to the end. So I'm interested in picking up book 2 when it comes out. I believe the series is called The Summoner. Alright, next up, I read Nemesis Gains by James S.A. Corey. This is book 5 in this series called The Expanse. And I am so glad I picked up this space opera years ago. It is so witty and so interesting and just so well done. I love how these two authors write together. They keep everything fresh. You've got the same characters, basically, the same core characters over and over, but somehow they keep it interesting. It never gets boring. They're able to add, just that extra something to it to keep it fresh. Also, the political situation in the books is different every time, even though you've mainly got the same kind of players that can be in action. It's just fascinating to read. I just love how it's handled. The banter is great in it. There were 3 things about this 5th installment that I feel like I can talk about without spoiling anything. One is the fact that I think the banter got even better in this installment, and I don't know how that's possible because it was already really good. Secondly, some of the characters get a chance to go home, and we've known they had kind of things they were hiding all along, and some of those storylines were just jaw-dropping, are you kidding me type storylines. So that was fantastic to read as well. And lastly, in the second book, there were 2 kick-butt female characters that were introduced. And they had kind of fallen, they were still mentioned, but they weren't in the forefront of the story. And they kind of came back in full force to the front of the story this time. And I am so excited about that. I'm sure if you could see my face while I was reading it, you probably would have thought I was reading a YA romance scene because I was just so giddy and so excited that they're coming back. And, yeah, I can't wait to see where it goes with the next installment. If you can't tell by the fangirling, I gave this 5 stars and I put it on my favorite shelf. All right, next up, I read Bull Mountain by Bill Panovich. The reason I picked this up is one of the people I am friends with on Goodreads gave it 5 stars and mentioned that 2 people that she follows or is friends with gave it 2 stars or gave it 5 stars. So I was intrigued because I have actually seen the reviews from those people as well on Goodreads. Um, the best way I can describe this story is a hillbilly mafia saga. It covers several decades through 3 generations of this family that live on this mountain in Georgia. And because of the geography of it, they're able to have a very lucrative illegal drug business that is kind of protected from any kind of intrusion from the government. In the latest generation, the youngest boy, there are 3 boys, the youngest has decided he doesn't really fit in with the rest of the family in this regard, and so he goes his own way. Ends up in law enforcement and ends up the sheriff over the mountain where the family lives. So he tries to stay out of their way. They try to stay out of his way, but it's family, and sometimes you've got to come together. So there are many times where things are tense. Of course, the family is always trying to protect themselves from anyone who might betray them or not be loyal. So this book is not for the faint-hearted at all. But the awesome thing about this book is about 35% of the way through, I thought about what I'd read so far, and I was like, oh, I see where this whole thing is going. I know how this is going to end. And then in the very next chapter, my big prediction for the ending took place, and there's still like 38% of the book to go. So, yeah, that happened to me 2 more times as well. So I finally just gave up trying to guess the ending of this one and just sat back and enjoyed the ride. And yeah, there's no way I ever would have guessed that ending. And it was really, really good. In the end, the last little bit just blew it for me and took it down from a 5 to a 4. But that's just like the last 3 pages, so not everyone may feel that way. I do think it was really enjoyable, really exciting. It was very compelling. I was very motivated to find out what was happening. And I just thought it was really well done. So 4 stars and enjoyed it a whole lot. Next, I read Violent Ends, and this is a short story anthology that all centers around a school shooting. 17 different YA authors got together and talked about the school shooting from a different perspective. So you've got 17 different perspectives, none of which is the shooter himself. So there's just a wide variety of characters and viewpoints that are represented, but characters overlap throughout the different stories, and whoever coordinated this thing, I think, just did a phenomenal job of making sure it was cohesive and it all worked together. Every story I thought was like a 4 for me, 4 stars. There were 3 that were kind of standouts that I would have put at like a 5. But the amazing thing was that from beginning to end, without being preachy, there's kind of a message in there in that you never know the smallest decision you make about how to treat someone, how that is going to play out in the end and impact so many other people and maybe yourself again in the future, and just how important the way you treat people is. So I just thought that was a phenomenal message, and don't want to say I enjoyed the topic of it, but enjoyed the reading experience that it offered, and just thought it was super well coordinated for an anthology. I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads, probably more like a 4.5 as I think about it. All right. Next up, kind of along the contemporary YA current events theme, I wanted to pick this up because Jason Reynolds was involved. This is All American Boys. It just came out in October. Jason Reynolds writes from this perspective of Rashad. Rashad is a young African-American man in a big city. I believe it's Springfield, Massachusetts. And he kind of looks the part with the sagging jeans and stuff, but he's a good kid. He stops in at the local convenience store to buy a soda and some chips. And as he has the chips, he is about to get the soda and he realizes that his phone is in his duffel bag and he needs to get it out. So he bends down, opens the bag, starts to get out his phone. And the lady beside him, who happens to be a white lady, stumbles over him. She doesn't mean to. She's just backing up from where she was trying to get a drink. And she stumbles into him. Well, this particular convenience store has had some trouble with theft in the past and burglary. So they have hired a police officer to be on duty in the store. So the police officer hears the commotion, comes over, sees the open duffel bag, sees the chips, sees the lady, sees the young man, makes some assumptions which are not correct, sadly, and decides that he needs to take the young man into custody. He does this with way more force than is necessary. The man is unarmed. He doesn't resist at all, and yet ends up hospitalized after the altercation. The altercation did spill out onto the sidewalk, and there it was witnessed by another young man who is described as the all-American boy. His name is Quinn. Quinn plays basketball on the team at school. He has a father who was a soldier and was killed in Afghanistan. So after his father died, his best friend's older brother kind of takes him under his wing as far as like teaching him more about playing basketball and working on his three-pointers and things like that. And he feels like he owes Paul a whole lot. And it turns out Paul is the police officer. He sees the look of rage on Paul's face. He sees that the kid's pretty defenseless and doesn't know what to do, so he runs away, hoping no one will ever find out he was involved. But he can't run from this situation because it turns out Rashad goes to the same school as him and is the best friend with one of the players on the basketball team that Quinn is on. So as Rashad is hospitalized, all the school students are trying to deal with this, including the ones on the basketball team. And Rashad and Quinn both go through these phenomenal periods of character growth where they're having to analyze, you know, what's happened and what is my duty as far as to society. What should I do? You know, how should I handle this? How does society need to change? What is wrong here? Why is no one talking about this? I don't think anyone can read this and not analyze their own thoughts on racism, law enforcement, police brutality, and things of that nature. I just think this is so well handled without letting anyone off the hook, and I absolutely love this. If I taught at the high school, I would be trying to get this book into the hands of every teenager I knew. Not that it's only relevant for teenagers, but I think this is a good way in to start conversations with them since the characters are their age and that would be interesting to them. Love this. Gave it 5 stars. Put it on my favorite shelf. All right, and the last thing I read, I'm not even sure how to pronounce, but I've seen some hype around this, and I didn't want to be spoiled on it. It is the Illuminae Files. It is by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, neither of which I have read before. 2 amazing things about this book. One, it's just the love that went into the crafting of this physical book. And I am an e-reader. I like to read on my e-reader. But in this case, I would highly recommend reading a physical copy. All right, I'm going to take the dust jacket off of this because the dust jacket is way cool. It's basically transparency. So what you're seeing through to is actually part of the book. I loved, you know, the feel of this. It's very high quality. And then you've got the author's pictures here. Hopefully there's no glare on that. I loved this about it, but now look at the hardcover without the dust jacket, and it still looks like a report. Looks like it's highlighted, looks like it's annotated, looks like there's redaction in it. How cool is that? And then the inside, the formatting of this is basically a report of an attack on a colony. Now, this is set in the year 2570 something. So we're talking way in the future, and Earth is never even mentioned in it, if that tells you anything. But there is a colony that is attacked. It's a mining colony. It's being run by one corporation, and it's attacked by another. At one point, there are some deaths, and you get a listing of all the people who are on the casualty list, along with a tiny thumbnail of their picture. Now, how they pull this off, I don't know. And it's kind of interesting reading the list because both authors' names are on there, plus some other people it sounds like they might know or were related to the publishing of the book. So that was kind of fun. You also get sometimes, let's see what this was that I tabbed. I tabbed a bunch of different like formats that are included in here. There are some emails going back and forth, and in this one it included some ASCII art, and I thought that was a very nice touch. Sometimes there are things like flyers or pamphlets, paperwork included. This is something that was a message to some kids on a ship. Also, you get like requests for things and whether they were approved or denied, just like document type stuff. This particular part was during a scene where little bitty fighters off of a huge ship are flying around, and the lines of text of what the pilots are saying is in these kind of curvy, swirly lines, kind of showing their flight path. I thought that was brilliant, and there's more than this. I just didn't want to spoil everything for you. Sometimes it looks like poetry with pictures in the background. So I was just blown away by the physical formatting, the printing formatting, the typography and everything involved. It really makes it feel like you're reading a report. The experience of it was phenomenal. And then on top of that, the story is great. It was super compelling. I was thinking about it most of the time when I had free time and couldn't be reading it. This is what would come to my mind. So it was extremely well. I love the plot. I love the pacing. I love the characters. I love the way it all played out. I had zero complaints with it in the end. There were times I was going back and thinking, is that the way it played out? And going back to check, just a wonderful experience. And if you can't tell, I love this. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's going to be the start of a series, and I will probably have to look into more by these 2 authors because I really super enjoyed this, and I will definitely be picking up book 2, most likely the week it comes out, whenever that may be. So, a phenomenal reading month, like I said. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading.